Since I started this channel, I have been waiting for this moment. The moment when I can do Christmas in July. In today's video, we have a variety of more neutral Christmas in July projects, things that you can use to make and sell. All of the ones in today's video will be thrift flips. You'll see some other DIYs that are handmade from scrap wood a little bit later on this month. In our first project, I have these wooden plates that I got at a thrift store near where I was staying last week when I was on vacation. They were $1 each, and they all had been painted on the top with this. It seems like it was either acrylic paint or maybe chalk paint, not sure. I sanded down the paint, and as you can see, it was very, I mean, it came off, but it was like very messy. So once it was sanded down, I brushed it off and cleaned it with some simple green and some water, and then I was able to let it dry and move on to our next step. I had this piece of scrap wood and a candle holder that I had fused together and painted last year for a different project, and I never ended up finishing it. So I'm going to take some wood glue and I'm going to adhere this base to the plate to create a simple riser. I let that dry overnight, and then the next day when I came back, it was fully adhered, ready to go. I am using raw silk by Fusion, and I'm going to paint the entire piece. I thought about painting the bottom or the base a different color, but it was going to be so complicated, and I always end up, I feel like not getting the exact look I'm going for, especially knowing how complicated it would be to get between the two pieces, the base and the plate on top, and try to get that candlestick, especially using a different color. So probably in another DIY, I probably will do it a different way, but for today, it's going to be about 3 coats of raw silk. Now I'm going to be taking different pieces of the Courier Stamp set by IOD and randomly stamping onto this plate to create a background. I used IOD black ink for this, but I also heat set it so that it would be ready for me to use a transfer on. I'm taking this gorgeous transfer from the Fairy Merry Christmas set by IOD. It was one of the holiday 2023 releases. And I am positioning it at an angle to kind of give it that more vintage, older effect. I like the idea of these like book pages, these old looking book page transfers coming onto pieces at an angle. And you'll see me do that a little bit in today's video on a couple different projects. I am transferring this on, and as you can see, there is a curved surface that I'm using. And what I noticed to be the simplest for me to ensure that there wasn't a lot of wrinkles or that my or my transfer didn't get messed up in any way was to kind of almost swipe it in one direction repeatedly and not so tough on each move. Sometimes when I'm transferring, I will press relatively pretty firmly to get the transfer over to the paper to the project, but for those edges where it's concave, I've noticed that doing it with less force and in one direction versus rubbing back and forth, it seems to work a little bit better for me. You'll see I did another one that was off camera because the dish or the bowl was very concave, and I was impressed with how well it worked. I sealed everything with Big Top by DIY, which is a polyacrylic sealer. And as I mentioned, I also finished this little trinket dish that I did off camera. I was so nervous about how the transfer would work. I didn't even film it. I'm sorry. I am so impressed though because it came out way better than I expected. I'm not sure if you remember this, but this is actually the other of those two. The coconut bra that I did a couple weeks ago, this is the other one in that set. So I finished this one up by painting it with Algonquin by Fusion, and then I distressed it back and then put in that beautiful floral transfer again from the holiday release by IOD. For our next project, I have this Mancala game that I thrifted from the thrift store. It was just under $3, and I can't remember if I got it half off or not, you guys, but the game was included. This was the container that it was in. It was not a complete set. And you'll get to see what I do with the actual game in another project, I guess in the future sometime. But this is something really neat because I really wanted to use this metal container somehow. So it's like a metal tin. I'm painting it with 2 coats of white Swan to give us a good base for some decoupage. I let that paint dry, and now I'm going to be using some liquid patina by DIY to decoupage on. This is one of Roy Cycled's decoupage papers from Sonnet's Maker's Box from July. I believe this one is called Tapestry, and I am going to do this all at once. It is a smaller piece, so instead of, doing the starter strip and going around, I actually did the entire top and I did wet my paper. And now I'm going to be very gently laying it down and making sure that it can cover from the top to the bottom. I do not want it to wrap around into the tin or underneath the tin. It's really just going to go right around it, and I cut it out to make sure that that would work. The other thing I wanted to ensure is that I would be able to wrap around the entire tin with this piece of decoupage paper, and it ended up working out. I think I only needed to kind of adjust it slightly on one of the sides purely because I didn't want it to look so obvious that it was one edge to an edge. And so I did do that kind of little ripped paper, I'm sorry, wet paper ripping method to kind of naturally blend the two edges together. Once I finished and sealed everything, I found this adorable transfer from I think it's Whispering Willow transfer set by IOD, and I thought it would be perfect to allow this piece to look a little bit more holiday. I did fill it with a variety of rocks, just stuff that I had in my stash, and that allowed it to maintain the base so that it didn't topple over when I added some faux florals. So this is what it looks like. And I did want to get that shot of the actual leaves that are in there because it was rather tall, but you can definitely see how perfect this naturally goes into any decor, even if you aren't going for a very traditional Christmas vibe. Next, I have this, I believe this is copper or brass. I'm not sure. It doesn't, it almost looks like it had been painted or something at some point because it does not match, the actual pot doesn't match the base, which is clearly, I believe, copper. I am painting it with a Dixie Belle chalk paint. This is the color English Ivy, and I'm going to give it 2 coats of this color. I'm sure you know that Dixie Belle is not necessarily one of the brands that I use very often, but I did get an amazing deal at over at Julie's Designs and Signs. She had a sale recently where there was a several pints of random Dixie Belle colors that were 40% off, and I just went on her website and I grabbed anything that I found that I felt was a good, like, neutral, easy to use color. So this was one of those colors that I grabbed. I think there were several blues and then a dark gray. Once that was dry, I took a soft standing sponge. I believe this might be probably 120 or 180 grit sandpaper or sanding sponge. I'm not sure. And I am very lightly distressing it to bring back some of the metal that was underneath on the edges, as well as that detail that's right in the middle of the pot. I also went back and distressed the handle of the pot, the edges of that as well. Now I'm going to be using this adorable transfer with a bird on it from the IOD holiday release. I can't remember the name of this one. It's not the fairy one, and I don't think there was another one that was like all very traditional Christmas stuff. This was the third one. So I am going to transfer this bird onto this piece, being very mindful of those ridges. I wanted to make sure that the face of the bird was underneath those ridges. That's why it's a little bit lower than the exact middle of the pot, but I feel like it ends up working out well. I considered putting it on an angle, but then I felt as though, first of all, that's something I've done on a lot of projects that you've already seen and you will see a little bit later. And, maybe that's not everybody's style. So I wanted to have a variety available to people who might buy this. Instead of using a polyacrylic, I sealed this piece with some clear wax, and now I'm following up with some Grunge Gray. This is another Dixie Belle. It's a Best Dang wax, and I am just going around the edges and almost making it look a little bit more grungy, a little dingier than maybe the stark green that it starts as. This top I also did cover with some copper liquid patina. It's Pennies from Heaven. This is from DIY. So I did paint that and then screwed it back on the top.
Christmas Eve, you came into this world. We were all up, holding our breaths till the word came.
I also had gotten this very tiny little trinket box. I think it was something my mom had given to me, or I don't know. We just found it, like I guess in a variety of things when we were cleaning out our basement. And I painted it with raw silk, and now I'm putting in a transfer, one of the fairy transfers. It looks like that mini book page like we were talking about earlier. And I did put it on at an angle on the inside of the box. I wanted this to kind of be a little surprise when you opened the box. The lid to this box is also painted with raw silk, but I did decoupage the leftover scraps from that tapestry recycled decoupage paper onto the lid. So it does coordinate as far as colors go, but the top and the base of the box do look different. I apologize that I don't have that on camera. But you've seen me decoupage, you kind of know how it goes, right? So this is the inside of the box. I do seal it with some polyacrylic sealer, and I very gently sand before I seal it. I very gently sand the edges of the box just to distress it back a bit. I also wanted to find a way to create a handle for the top of the box, but I chose to go in a different direction than just using a simple like drawer pull or something. I found this little ceramic bunny that I had had in my stash back from Easter, and I took some Gorilla Glue and glued it on top of this box. So now the box can serve as both just a decor piece as well as a functional actual little trinket box. Next, I have this wooden sled decor piece that I found at the Goodwill bins when I was digging one day. And I'm going to start by removing the base of the sled so that I can paint it. I will be replacing it at the end. Ultimately, I knew I wanted this sled to be white or a lighter color, but I started with Blue Pine by Fusion to give it a solid base to cover up all of the detail that you have going on in that original piece. And also to allow for if I wanted to do milk paint, which is actually what I ended up doing, I wanted to make sure that there was something sealed in underneath so that the crackle effect would happen. One of the things about this little sleigh is that the inside of it does have some parts of wood that are cracked a little bit and not as nice. And instead of sanding it down, I I had some bad luck with some other thrifted pieces that had very thin wood like this. Trying to sand it did not work in my favor. So I did not really want to do that. I instead decided to just try to allow it to have some extra protection with that all-in-one paint as the base. I put that aside to dry and I mixed up some milk paint. This is Sweet Pickins creamy milk paint that I will be using. I am using a chip brush because sometimes that milk paint can be kind of harsh on brushes. So I tend to use the cheaper brushes that I can easily throw away and replace if needed. And I am going to be painting the entire sleigh on top of this original blue pine color. I'm painting the entire thing with multiple coats of this creamy milk paint. As I'm painting on each coat, I am taking out my heat gun. As you can see, it's in frame. I don't know if you actually see me use it, but and I am blasting the paint with that heat gun to allow that chippiness to come through, that crackled effect. I really wanted it to stand out because I wanted to bring back some of that blue pine that's underneath and create that more aged look to it. It's a very rough piece of wood, so I wanted to make sure that I kind of leaned into that versus trying to mask it. Here's a look at that finished crackled effect. And then what I'm going to do is come back with a Kindest Regards stamp, the Kindest Regards stamp by IOD, and I'm going to be stamping it with IOD's Stone Gray ink on the two sides of the sleigh. Any parts of the sleigh that I don't get on the first stamping, I use different edges and parts of the Kindest Regards stamp to fill in so that the entire side of the sleigh has that cursive font. Now, my original plan was to use those pieces of greenery that is part of the mold from the O Christmas tree mold, but I ended up not using them. I actually forgot that that was a plan until I saw this video right now. What I ended up doing was taking multiple transfers from one of the holiday releases last year. These are very neutral, but like they do have like a kind of a little bit of those traditional reds in there. So it does lend itself to a more wintry holiday vibe. I'm taking a couple of those transfers, there's duplicates of them, and putting one towards the top of the side of the sleigh and one towards the bottom. I then made sure to seal this piece with a polyacrylic sealer. Here is that big top by DIY that I always talk about and never show you guys on camera. I promise you I do it. This big top by DIY I do get from Sammy at Unicorn Dust Designs. So head on over to her website, unicorndustdesigns.com, if you are interested in purchasing this product.
It was on a cold Christmas Eve. You came into this world. We were all alone.
Last project is by far my favorite. This is a box that my mom had given me. She had a few other ones that she had found when she was cleaning out one of the cabinets in our house. And I'm going to start by painting with two coats of Crinoline by DIY. Only the outside of the box is going to get painted. I'm leaving that inside cherry wood color as is. Once that paint was completely dry, I took a wet rag and I am wet distressing back just in random spots, mainly the edges and the corners, but I do have a couple hints of distressing within the box or, in the middle of the box. Now, here's where the fun begins. I have this transfer that I have been saving for a long time. It came from the Brocante transfer set by IOD, and I am positioning it, I'm cutting it out so I can position it in different places on the box to make sure that I can really bring out and showcase all of the pieces of this gorgeous greenery and these florals. As I was transferring them on, however, I felt like this needed something more. Now, another thing you'll notice is this in no way looks like any type of holiday related box, right? This looks like a simple everyday style, which I liked, but it didn't feel finished with just this transfer. And I didn't know how to make sure that the other blue flowers that are on the bottom that are cut out, how to make sure to put them on the box without it looking so plain everywhere else. So I decided to use those fairies from that Fairy Merry Christmas transfer set. I have been waiting again. These are other ones that I just absolutely loved these transfers, but I had no idea the best way to use them. That set comes with these fairies in different sizes, different styles. Some look like they're on book pages, other ones are just like plain within nature, I guess is the best way to explain it. They're gorgeous. The book page ones that were a little larger is what I ended up using in a variety of different places on this box to make it look very vintagey and almost like a collector's piece, I guess. One thing I do want to mention, when you are doing a project like this where you have a transfer going on to two parts of some or two different things, so for example, the lid of the box, the base of the box, you want to be very mindful on where the transfer is hitting that crease. So looking for natural splits or splits that won't be as won't look as messed up, I guess, if for some reason a piece of the transfer gets ripped off or in the transfer process kind of rips a little bit. Faces, you want to make sure on a flat surface, not anywhere near that crease. That's kind of where I'm going with this. The other thing I thought about when putting these pages on is making sure they didn't all look very uniform. So not only angling them, but positioning them in different parts where I even layered some of this transfer you'll see here right on top of that brocante transfer. And I also made it angle over not only the side going down, but also over to the other side. So the page was kind of almost laying in three different parts of this rectangle cube. The other thing I wanted to do was there were some extra spaces on the box where I might not have been able to put like another one of these transfers that's a little larger. I didn't want as much detail, but I wanted there to be something there. And I just dug into my stash of transfers and I had a bunch of random text. I believe it was from the brocante transfer set because that one has a lot of random parts where there's text that is not necessarily connected to the rest of the transfers on the same page. And I placed them in various places to just offset and ensure that it wasn't just something plain next to this gorgeous transfer. In a different project, what I might have done is probably stamp something behind the transfers to start, but this isn't where I intended to go with this box when I originally started. It just was a very, I guess, happy accident, surprise, discovery. I don't know. I was very excited about the idea that ended up coming to fruition. I hope you enjoyed today's first of a few Christmas in July projects. Thank you so much for joining me today. Have a wonderful Sunday, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.